Okay, Ann, please introduce our speaker.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're honored tonight to have Garry Adelman, an author, co-author, and editor of 20 books and 50 Civil War articles. Additionally, he has lectured at the National Archives, the Library of Congress, and the Smithsonian Institute. He appeared on the History Channel as the chief consultant on the award-winning show Gettysburg, as well as Grant, and more recently, as of last year, Battles for America. Garry is the chief historian for the American Battlefield Trust and the vice president of the Center for Civil War Photography. Previously, he was a licensed battlefield guide at Gettysburg for 27 years. Let's welcome Garry Adelman.
Thank you. All right, I'm testing my mic. Oh, yes, it works, right? Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. I have a 4-hour talk to give in 48 minutes. So we got 48 minutes, so let's get started here. I'm going to be, let's see, did that advance too? There we go. There's a lot to cover here, and that's why this could be a 4-day talk if we wanted it to be. But we've got a lot to cover, but the first thing we got to know is that the Civil War really started in Charleston Harbor, both literally and photographically. The rebels shot first, shooting photos within 1 day of when Fort Sumter surrendered. This is among the first photos of the entire Civil War. And, there were thousands of photographers in America at the time, 3,000 or so photographers working, but most of them worked in their studios making portraits and whatnot. Very few of them, a handful, a few dozen, actually left their studios and took their bulky cameras out to take pictures in the field. In order to do it, they're going to have mobile darkroom wagons. They had to be developed within a minute or two of when they were taken, or else these wet plate photos would actually dry out. So they went into the field, they brought tents, they would live in those tents, and they would bring complex chemicals and sensitive glass plates with them, and they would do their business. Now, I said they brought glass plates. Here's a zoom in on one of them showing a photographer holding a 4 by 10-inch plate. Okay, what he's going to do with that 4 by 10-inch plate is put it into his darkroom wagon, okay? He's going to coat it with a sticky substance called collodion, iodides, bromides, and then they're going to make it light sensitive using silver nitrate, and then they're going to put it in a light-proof box and run it out to the camera to where it had already been set up, slide it into the camera, remove the light-proof slide there, and then take off the lens cap, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8 seconds, put it back on, put it back in the light-proof box, run it back to the darkroom, and develop it right away. And if it worked, and it didn't always work, they're going to end up with this, a glass plate negative, this one showing the Dunker Church at Antietam, okay? Now, if you take that glass plate negative and you put it on a black background, it becomes a positive, and that's known as an ambrotype, a piece of glass with a negative on it, with a black background behind it, and you often see those as cased images in the Civil War. Now, why are there 2 of them? Of course, in this case, these are 3D photos, like what I'm showing you today, but just using a different set of technology to do it. They would run that glass plate out to a twin lens camera. The 2 twin lenses were an eye width apart, and after they printed them, they could put this negative against some light-sensitive paper, so say albumin paper, and then put it in the sun, and you end up with a positive photo. And you all have figured, you've seen these before. I'm sorry, y'all have seen these before. You put it into that special viewer, and all of a sudden it becomes in 3D. Let me stress that not only were 80% of the outdoor documentary photos in the Civil War taken in this format, but they were taken as if that's the only way you would ever see them. The photographers took them low to the ground and often put something in the foreground so that you would have this 3D effect of something in the foreground, middle, and background, making a perfect 3D photo. Of course, they had different size negatives as well. In this case, a 7 by 9, and this is also at Antietam, the famous Burnside Bridge. And you could go ahead and purchase that in a studio, or You could see it in your newspaper, your Harper's Weekly magazine or something like that, except they could not print a photograph, so they had to turn it into something like this, an engraving or a woodcut in order to do it. You could also go into a shop and buy a colorized version of that artwork. So there were ways to get this out, and in some ways, a photo could be seen by 1 million people within a month or two of when it actually happened. Now, after the war started, there weren't a whole lot of great subjects out in the field, and very few people were doing it, and those who tried tended to fail using a mobile darkroom. So here's a photo called Letters Home. It's guys writing and sewing up their clothes. Big deal, that's war. You also have soldiers bored in camp, literally making human pyramids when that wasn't enough for them. Okay, let's get a little bit more crazy. We'll talk about this later, of course. Now, soon enough, it's going to get real, though. Here is a spring, actually March of 1862 photo taken on the Virginia Peninsula, and you can start to see the fresh graves of some of the Vermont soldiers who had actually perished in the fight before the siege of Yorktown. Before long, by that June, they're going to get closer to really showing war. In this case, some wounded soldiers who had been wounded the day before in the Battle of Gaines's Mill, the second bloodiest battle up to that, in American history up to that time. So they're actually getting wounded soldiers who will actually be captured the next day. Then at the Battle of Cedar Mountain in August of 1862, they're going to get dead horses actually on the battlefield, dead beasts. This is getting closer to actually showing the public what wars looks like. But then they're going to get a lot closer at the battlefield of Antietam, where Alexander Gardner and his crew, working for the famed Matthew Brady, secured 20 photos of dead soldiers actually on the battlefield, in this case in the Bloody Lane. This was rare, okay? It was very difficult for a photographic crew to be in the field and then to be at a battlefield right afterward before the dead were buried and to be on the winning side. Okay, these are mostly northern photographers. I'll talk about this a little bit more later. Okay, these northern photographers had to get a Union victory, and there weren't a whole lot of those in the East in 1861 or 1862. So they got 20 at Antietam. Photographers went out west and actually recorded 4 at the battlefield of Corinth, showing the human carnage, 1 at the Battle of Second Fredericksburg or Chancellorsville campaign, about 40 at Gettysburg, another 8 outside Fredericksburg field hospitals, 6 at Spotsylvania, and 23 at Petersburg for exactly 103 photos of human carnage on a battlefield. Now, I might be accused of sensationalizing this. That's not the case at all, okay? But this is the rarest of things. It only happened on 8 occasions, and in many cases, this is our best tool to figure out what Confederate soldiers were actually wearing in battles, because we don't have photos of them actually in camps. So we need to use these not to sensationalize them, but to understand things a little bit better. Now those 104 plus about 9,900 more photos will end up in sleeves. Each of these sleeves is one of these Civil War photos, a glass plate in Matthew Brady's nephew's house in Washington, D.C. Luckily, those collections have ended up at the National Archives, the U.S. Army War College, and at the Library of Congress, the mother lode of Civil War photos, where you can go and download high-resolution photos of whatever interests you at the time. Now, if I could wave a magic wand and get rid of one photographic myth, it would be this, that somehow all the glass plates burned up in the nation's greenhouses. This is just almost complete myth. We know which photos the photographers took. They made catalogs of those photos, okay? I've gone to the Library of Congress and saw the drawer where they've kept them in. They've taken some of those out, and I've seen them. The actual glass plate negatives, we call it witness glass. Here's the Bloody Lane. That's the Richmond Capitol up there. And then I even take selfies with them. Wow, check it out, the actual... The actual glass plate, this is Lincoln and McClellan after the Battle of Antietam, okay? The idea that they burned up in the greenhouses is just patently false, and that's one of many myths about Civil War photography that I'd love to clear up. Now, I showed you this plate earlier. Remember, 4 by 10, that's 40 square inches. Most of us in this room grew up with 35 millimeter negatives. They're a little bit more than an inch wide and less than an inch tall. Some of us also grew up with 110 negatives, okay? These glass plate negatives are 30, 40, 60 times larger, okay? And unlike today's digital pictures, and unlike the grain you used to get on our 35 millimeter film, this is a chemical sheet. There is no grain, there's no pixelation, and that allows us to zoom in a way that, the Civil War photographers had no idea. If you scan this glass plate in a high resolution, here's a photo of a contraband, John Henry, at Brandy Station, and I estimate that the photographer's about 15 feet away from him. You can zoom in on that glass plate and see cracks on his hands. If his palms were up, you'd be able to see his fingerprints. So there's probably some people in this room with some really good SLR digital cameras. I challenge you, stand 15 feet away from someone you know. See if you can achieve this kind of resolution. And this holds actual benefit to us as we study the Civil War. Here's the roulette house at Antietam. The most famous thing about the roulette house is that when the Union soldiers were there, they talked about that Mr. Roulette was a beekeeper and that a Confederate shell had come in and damaged one of the apiaries and they got swarmed. These soldiers who were about to attack the Bloody Lane said that their most trying experience at that battle was not attacking the Bloody Lane, but being swarmed by angry bees. Well, if you zoom in on a teeny tiny portion of that photo, you can actually see the apiaries and that they've been damaged as well. Okay, man, that's it, right? When you have, a story about the Civil War and then it gets otherwise confirmed, in this case photographically, man, that's what makes it all great. You can take a pretty normal-looking photo here, taken on the beach on Morris Island, actually. It doesn't look too interesting. Oh, you know what, wait. These people are actually looking out at something else, it seems. So let's zoom way in and see one of the only actual combat photos of the Civil War. You know, we don't have any photos of troops standing and blazing away at each other, the 4, 5, 6 seconds. It just wouldn't work. Nor would a photographer want to be in the middle of a battle either, especially with such long exposures, and it takes 10 minutes to take a photo in the best circumstances. But here you have the USS Ironsides actually clearly, firing shots into positions near Charleston Harbor there. You can see some of the monitors, with most of the ship completely invisible. We have another combat photo taken by a Confederate photographer named Cook, actually, and you can kind of see battle smoke as well. That's about as close as we can get. That is, unless we look at the one exploding shell in Fort Sumter, the famous shot. And man, when I first started studying this stuff, I bought this hook, line, and sinker without thinking that most Civil War photos take seconds to develop, and, was he really just sitting there out in the open as if the shell would hit him? Well, later it was proved that this is just a painting that someone took a picture of. And there's other things like that I'll talk about. You can even zoom into the hero of Gettysburg, John Burns. You may have heard of him, known as the only guy to come out and help, the only civilian to come out and defend the town against the Confederates. He's 69 years, 10 months old at the time of the battle. He got wounded 3 times, captured by the Confederates. They let him go, and he went on to become the hero of Gettysburg, okay? Now, one thing you got to know about Gettysburg is that, or any of these battles, is that when you have 8,000 people killed outright and 8,000 horses killed as well, it's not right after the battle that the maggots go and infest all of this, flesh, and then it's a week or 2 later when they release these billions of flies that are everywhere. And apparently there were flies all over Gettysburg 2 weeks after the battle when this picture was taken. So a friend of mine actually went and he found a fly on John Burns, okay? I'm not sure if it has anything to do with his hygiene. We'll see about that. But he found a fly on him. So I zoomed in, and I found 4 flies on John Burns. Right there, hold on for a second. Yeah, I mean, you could even see their wings, okay? So that friend of mine who found the 1 fly didn't like that, so he found 17 flies on and around John Burns. Now, if this looks crazy at all, there are 2 different pictures taken of John Burns, so you can see which black dots are there and which ones have gone and whatnot. And again, 17 flies, maybe I would question his hygiene. And of course, the guy who portrays John Burns, every time I say this, doesn't like this at all. He's a grouchy dude in real life, and he was grouchy then. Now, here's a photo you probably haven't seen before. It doesn't appear in books, but it's a fascinating glimpse into a Civil War darkroom wagon okay? You can actually see some of the materials that the photographer uses, you know, the lens and whatnot. Let me zoom in on that one a little bit, because you can actually start to look into the darkroom wagon there, and you can see one of the lenses there. Oh, I have an idea. Let's get these guys some belts and some guns and stuff. Let's move this barrel over here and stage one of the most famous photos of the entire Civil War. Okay, how many times have many of you seen this in books like, oh, you know, USCT, black troops under fire here? You know, it looks real, we want to believe it, but the other photo tells a different story. And by the way, if this was a combat photo, where's the photographer? Is there some giant stone wall next to him or something that he's just hiding behind? Now wait, guys, you know, so these photographs, you know, I base a lot of my life around them, and they do show an overwhelming reality, but we have to question them, just like we do for all historical sources. When a surgeon says that a soldier coughed up some of his uniform 16 weeks after the Battle of Gettysburg when he was shot through the lungs, you might want to question that. I don't know, surgeons today tell me that's impossible, but here it is, and there's the affidavit of the surgeon right below it. If you hear about the famous story, especially if you go to the old courthouse in Vicksburg, Mississippi, they have the mini ball pregnancy, and there's the mini ball right there. The mini ball that, you know, one of two things happened. The most obvious one is that a soldier shot, you know, somebody else, and it hit his enemy, and it went through his clothes, through his drawers, through his testicles, out his drawers and out the pants, and then flew across into the midsection of a sweet, innocent virgin who had certainly never been with anybody before and impregnated her. So that's option one. Option two, maybe she wasn't the first woman to have sex out of wedlock, but it's good for us to consider these things, I guess. This zooming into Civil War photographs does have practical application. Here's a photo you may have seen before. It's right near the Manassas National Battlefield Visitor Center. The parking lot is now right over there. This area still fills with water to this day, and I go into how I know that in the Manassas book that I have for sale here. But if you zoom in, and this is just a print, you can actually see on one of these carved headboards, by the way, this is a grave surrounding the water hole, it says JTM. Lexington, Virginia. Do you see it right there? It's hard to tell, but under magnification you can see it says that. There's only one person who died on the Confederate side with those initials, and it's John T. McCorkle, a 23-year-old school teacher. He was in the Stonewall Brigade, 4th Virginia, part of the Rockbridge Gray Company. And, you know, I don't know where his grave ended up. These Confederate graves were later moved to Confederate hospitals, but maybe this is the best we can do for him, identifying at least where he was. And that's, by the way, where the Stonewall Brigade fought at the Battle of First Manassas. You know, sometimes we can do other things just that humanizes things. Here's a pretty, you know, not the, most genteel of subjects here. Here is a cockfight actually about to happen here, and everybody's gathered around. If you zoom in, they're holding little whips, like horse whips, to get the action going. But when you zoom in, one of the guys is actually holding probably the most genteel magazine in America at the time, the Atlantic Monthly. And you can actually see July of 1864 written right there on the cover. So sometimes you just find things that are really interesting within these photos. Sometimes you have a photo you've been looking at your whole life, and then there's something inside it that makes you ask a question or teaches you a little bit more about the past. In that same photo, you see something that people think didn't happen at all. A smiler. Oh my God, he's smiling right there above Union General Orlando B. Wilcox there. And when you start to zoom into Civil War photos, you find that people smiled. This photo is odd because this is a zoom in at Antietam that shows probably a younger girl that got head lice. Now, by the way, or something like that. This was not the style in 1862 exactly. So something's going on there, and she does not look happy, but her sister apparently is smiling. She's one of the Miller girls. She's on the steps of the Miller house. The Millers owned the cornfield at Antietam, probably the bloodiest place on Antietam's battlefield and one of the most blood-soaked places in all of America. And yet, a couple of weeks after the battle, she's smiling. Why? Did something funny happen? Is she a 14-year-old girl that's uncomfortable with what's going on? I don't know, but it just humanizes people. here's a guy that, the cat that swallowed the canary on a pontoon boat at North Anna. And to me, this just says that they're more like us than we ever knew, of course. Here's Kate Chase, one of the most captivating Civil War personalities with her confident smirk. She was going to be the first lady of the country when her dad, Salmon Chase, became president. Of course, that didn't quite work out, nor did the rest of her life, but for a while, she was the belle of the North. And there she is in a camp. And here's a guy that's got a reason to smile. He's standing on the Confederate breastworks or ramparts at Petersburg the day after the position fell, after 10 months of constant fighting. Here's a guy that's got a reason to smile, to be sure. Now, on the flip side of that, of course, is we have famous photographs taken all over the place, and some of them are of the dead. Most of them aren't. Most of them are U.S. Grant leaning against the tree, Robert E. Lee standing behind his Richmond home, Lincoln facing McClellan, things like that. But this guy is different than most of the other photos of human carnage in that he's not bloated. He hadn't yet succumbed to putrefaction yet. It's also more fascinating because he's the most photographed corpse of the Civil War. Here he is, photographed here 4 times in this location, and what some of you know is that the photographer, in a flash of creative excitement, put him on a blanket and dragged him right up there between these 2 rocks, and then recorded, I don't know, in the top 5 most famous photos of the Civil War, the home of the rebel sharpshooter. Clearly the same guy, same wrinkles in his clothes, same face, everything is the same. And because this is a famous photo, and nobody knew this till 100 years after the Civil War, that the photographer had kind of staged this photo. He is indeed deceased, but it was set up for that. Now, because it's so famous, people have been trying to identify him for 80 years or so. This guy is a good candidate. He's from Texas, a guy named Hoge in the 1st Texas. They fought right there. It kind of looks like him, but people are hard. Rocks are easy to identify. More recently, somebody tried to say it was a Georgian. But I just don't know how you confirm these things without any sort of other corroborating evidence. One of the paintings that y'all have for sale, and probably number 1, maybe most famous photo of the Civil War, the 3 Confederate prisoners at Gettysburg, a guy simply convinced the post office without any documentation, hey, these are my ancestors. Okay, let's make a stamp series out of it, and they did. Problem is that supposedly these guys are father and son. Yeah, maybe, but that seems like a stretch. Well, beside the point that we know that one was already dead, one was in a Winchester hospital during middle of July, so it's totally impossible that this could be right, but this is what keeps us on our toes at a Civil War roundtable. Even maybe more interesting to many, especially in this Instagram, TikTok land, is the animals always doing cool things or people having animals doing cool things. I mean, I could already see the social media post, dog on a limber. Like, there it is, and this is maybe what we have to resort to in order to get younger people interested here. Oh, look at these little kitty cats over there. I mean, we got multiple kittens. When we start zooming in, you start looking more and you start seeing mascots for regiments. And then, what is this, a dog and a rooster in the same photo? And supposedly the colonel of the 7th Ohio would actually, make his rooster call during a battle. But of course, we have the most famous mascot of the entire Civil War, and it has to be Old Abe. He's an eagle that would fly up above the battles where the Wisconsin unit was actually involved. He's even depicted in the cyclorama at Atlanta. Pretty cool stuff. And of course, he lives on as the, a patch that you see on a lot of military coats to this day. Of course, the most photographed dog of the Civil War, I say of course like you know this. I've been really keeping track of, which dog is the most photographed. Well, there's 6 photos of this dog outside at City Point outside Petersburg. He's a Dalmatian. This is Rufus Ingalls' coach dog, and I like this one because you can pinpoint the spot exactly. Those steps are still there. It's the Epps house at Appomattox Manor. I mean, you can just line it up perfectly. So, of course, I'm there with a photo group, and they say, oh, yeah, Gary, you're going to get down, and you're going to be the dog. And most of you don't know me, but you know that I'm going to be game to do that. So I had to kind of make the tail kind of happen a little bit. And this was in 2008. And I happened to run another seminar there recently, so I had my photographer outfit on, and I tried to fashion a tail. I don't know. Now I just look angry, so I don't know. And of course, there's a lot of stuff that animals leave behind. Think about the tens of thousands of horses and mules that are around Civil War battlefields and camps, and when you start looking, you see a lot more than smiles. You see Civil War dung everywhere, and there's somebody in the audience that says, wow, Civil War dung, check it out. Of course it would show up. Now, on the more frustrating end is that, I go on eBay, and to this day, I'll see photos that are dated, 1867, and they'll say, Abraham Lincoln, give me $1 million, okay? And I think the only thing you need is a top hat, because here's a photo showing future General Wade Hampton at Fort Sumter after it fell. It makes sense that, you're going to have Confederates in there, after Fort Sumter fell. But, in today's lingo, it's like a fiesta of Lincolns. All you need is a top hat, okay? You don't even need to really have a top hat if you're wearing a short hat, but you're standing in front of a light post that makes it look like your hat is really tall. That makes you Abraham Lincoln. And of course, during the Gettysburg Address, look how many Lincolns there are. Actually, you see what I've done, right? Because that's Lincoln, and he's not wearing his top hat. This is our world, right? How many times do y'all, come across people who are just saying things, all the time, especially if you have the pleasure of being on social media at all. Man, people will say anything, and they'll try to sell anything to you. It even goes into the post-war years, where other presidents can be Abraham Lincoln as well. Now, some of you may have seen this photo before. This is entitled Dead on Matthews Hill from the Battle of Bull Run, okay? Well, early on, people sort of had an issue with this because, this is a summer battle, and this guy in the foreground, the dead dude, is wearing, an overcoat, and so are some of the other guys. So right away, you kind of have a problem with that, right? Another problem is that there are two other photos of the same guys very much alive. Okay, so, and here they are, they're in different positions. You can see the same distinctive leaning tree right there. Okay, so again, like the mini ball pregnancy, we have two choices. One, that the photographer was here. Hey guys, let's take a picture. Okay, that's pretty good. Let's switch around again and take another picture. And after which these guys suffer 100% casualties, and the photographer was not injured. So that's option one. Or maybe the photographer said, hey, I could use this photo, play dead on a battlefield, and I'll be able to sell the photo. And obviously, that's clearly what happened. Now, I've been showing a lot of Eastern, stuff so far, but I want you to know we do have Civil War photos taken around these parts. We have them in Brownsville, Texas, that you're seeing here. We have some photos taken actually at San Francisco Bay, and this is among one of the very few photos that was actually censored during the Civil War because this was a prison during the Civil War. Now, why this focus on photos in the East? Well, if you wanted to photograph all the camps and battlefields in the East, what we call the East, look at this, like, oh, I'm at Gettysburg, I've got a couple hours, let me head down to Antietam. Wait, I've got a week off, I'm gonna head down to Petersburg, I'm gonna cover all those in between at Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania, let me head out to the Shenandoah Valley, it's pretty easy. Well, covering the Western Theater is a little bit different, okay? You've got you want to cover Central North Carolina? Okay, well, I've got 3 months off. Let me take the weird roundabout way, and I'll make my way over to Vicksburg and take 15 photos, by which time my chemistry is all bad. So there's a real challenge in covering, the West. Now, this leads us to this ridiculous thing that basically you've got portions of Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia that constitute the East, and then you've got this other thing called the West. If you go south and east from Petersburg, Virginia, somehow you're in the West, okay? And those of you who study this know why, of course. This is because the Western armies end up over there. But unfortunately, even during the Civil War, this is more the attitude. During the Civil War and today, there's this sort of Eastern, there's Gettysburg and Spotsylvania and Petersburg and Richmond, and then there's all this other stuff. In 1862, when the Union armies captured 100,000 square miles of territory in Tennessee and Arkansas and portions of Kentucky and whatnot, the Union's feeling good. And then Robert E. Lee wins one battle on the peninsula, and all of a sudden it's, oh my God, protect the capital, we're going to lose. Abraham Lincoln couldn't figure out this Eastern-centric sort of thing during the Civil War. But to this day, you go out to Western battlefields, you go to Bentonville, even around here, they're a little bit anxious to make fun of Gettysburg, and I get it because it's just, been this big thing in the room for so long, Now, if people in the West think they have it bad, imagine being in the Trans-Mississippi, oh my God, Pea Ridge, Glorieta Pass, Val Verde, Palmita Ranch. I mean, that's a whole different story. And that was hardly photographed at all, okay? As you move west and as you move south, the number of photographs went down. Why? Not only were there more photographers in the Eastern Theater, but the blockade worked. As soon as the Civil War started, the South had trouble getting things in through the lines, and you know what they weren't doing is saying, okay, we need 10,000 guns, we need 1 million pairs of shoes, and by the way, we need photochemicals. That's really what we need. They weren't running the blockade with Southern photochemicals, and when the Southern photographers could get any, they were really using it to make money. The portrait trade, selling them to soldiers and civilians alike, that was a sure thing. That was commissioned work. So not only do you have most photos taken by Northern photographers, most of those are taken in the Eastern Theater, and most of those are taken at places that the Union controlled. Okay, the photographers couldn't get access to it, and therefore we have lots of photos of places like Antietam and not so many photos of places like Richmond until the end of the war, okay, which is why most photos of Charleston and Richmond are taken in 1865. We do have some Confederate photos early in the war before their chemicals ran out. Here's a Mississippi unit in Florida actually gathered up. And we have a couple of scenes like that, a couple meaning 20 or 30 that actually show Confederates in the early war before they really got uniforms. Now, the most photographed Western Theater place is definitely Lookout Mountain at Chattanooga. This is called the Umbrella Rock. It's restricted access for a while. If you beg and plead enough, they'll let you out there because the rock is just still very much the same. Pretty cool stuff. Let's see if I can go back one. Yeah, that actually works. So you can do some then and now stuff with it. Now, the most famous photo probably taken up there shows U.S. Grant actually with members of his staff. The Point Lookout Rock is actually out there in the distance, and here's Grant, of course, apparently chomping on his cigar, looking up toward his staff. Now, I will maintain that the only photo that shows Grant with a cigar is actually taken at Massaponax Courthouse, where he's clearly smoking one after he's become a lieutenant general here, and you can clearly see him smoking outside Massaponax Church. But that doesn't stop everybody from, everybody that portrays Grant and everybody that makes a lithograph or artwork of Grant, he's got a pocket full of cigars, he's smoking a cigar and everything like that. Now, when you actually look at this photo, I'm not seeing him smoking a cigar. I'm seeing some sort of a stick that might be headed toward his face. And I'm not sure about you, but, when I smoke, I don't really smoke out of my mustache. I tend to smoke, like out of my actual mouth, like, not over there. I mean, why don't you put it in your chin while you're at it there? So, what I'm seeing is a continuation of this stick and a little problem with the negative right there. It is. I just don't see that going into him, but we'll see. But we have so many photos taken up there. In fact, here's a photo from below. Grant is standing right next to that stump up there. And look at this, to get up on this rock called actually Roper's Rock today for a particular reason. But when you start zooming in on these ladders, look at this. You start to realize that people of the past are just nuts. How is this guy supposed to get from here to all the way up there? And if he falls, bad stuff's going to happen. Let me even zoom in a little bit more. Look at this. In fact, it's called Roper's Rock because a photographer named Roper fell off of the rock to his death. And you see Frank Leslie's actually, they called him Porter in this, but this dude has taken a headfirst dive off of Roper's Rock. And when you start to zoom into Civil War photos, you also see things like this where, these guys and a lot of people couldn't swim in the 1860s, and they're carrying heavy packs, and they've got like 2x6s that they're coming off of ships with, okay? And apparently this is common. When you start looking around, you see it on one ship, another ship. Look at this. Where's OSHA? You've got this thing practically up to its hub over here. And you see people taking unnecessary risks. This is High Bridge. It's called that for a reason. And these guys that you might be able to see perched up top in the middle here have no hope of being seen by anybody in the 1860s in this photo, and that doesn't stop them from standing up on the world's most rickety. Look at that thing. Looks like it's ready to fall as it is. This guy's even got his little stilt sort of over there, just in case somebody might zoom in on it. Now, You could say, well, life is cheap during war. You're attacking places like the Stockade Redan at Vicksburg, so you're willing to take risks, and if you go out to this Point Lookout Rock here, the most photographed rock of the Civil War, I believe, and stand up there for the photo, that's probably worth it. And of course, then it became a competition to see how close to the edge, like someone's willing to get, not only right to the edge, but this guy's saying, oh yeah, you think you're going to get further? I'm going to go down a little lower. Now, let me assure you that this is no trick photography here. There's no hidden rock right below the camera here. If you fall off of this thing, there's no maybe about it. You're going to die. I stood up there, and I've skydived, I've bungee jumped. I was getting no closer than that, because it is certain death if you fall off the edge. But that didn't stop guys with weakly soled shoes, going right up to the edge. And imagine being the parent of this young man here who isn't satisfied to be out there, but he's going to dangle his leg all the way down. I mean, what is he thinking? I mean, look, a stiff wind can come along, and all of a sudden, everything's done. But I want to assure everybody, we all know because you can't help it, we're much smarter than people of the past. We wouldn't fight in long lines of battle, and we wouldn't take unnecessary risks. I mean, we're a much more developed society now. Certainly for a picture, we're not going to just do things like this. My God. One thing, I got a lot of head shakes there. I'm happy about it. One thing you've already seen, that is a blast to do, and I hope that you do it when you go to your historic sites, is do some then and now stuff. Because, if you can take a photo out and look at it and stand at the same place and maybe know something about the scene that you're looking at, to me, that's as close to time travel as we're going to get, or at least just about as close. Nobody told me where this was. I knew it was on a place called Mason's Island. Look it up. We have the internet. That's Theodore Roosevelt Island now. I knew that had to be Georgetown back there, and that had to be the Aqueduct Bridge. It took me about 5 minutes to locate the rocks, okay? I encourage you all to do it. And because I work for a preservation organization, we buy a lot of battlefield land, so I get access to a lot of cool places. Here are U.S. engineers actually digging a road so that these wagons could actually find a safe way up the bluff after crossing the North Anna River at Jericho Mill. This is an extensive series of 15 or 20 photos. Yes, that's a lot of any Civil War place. The road is still there, and we were able to stand up there in the same road. And I didn't know it at the time, but I needed to have a boss. Excuse me for a second. You can see in the original picture there's a boss up there, and I happened to pick the guy who would later succeed Jim Lighthizer as the head of the trust. So I guess I was doing a little future planning there, putting him in the boss spot. And I encourage y'all to, explore, whether it be on site or on the internet, those things that have long fascinated you, or maybe that you get a new bug on because you saw a new movie or a new documentary or some dude waving his arms around got you worked up about Civil War photography. I've always had a particular interest in the Capitol, and I'm showing you the first one, the first view of the Capitol. This is, I believe, 1846. It's a daguerreotype. That's a copper plate that was light sensitive. It makes a single positive, so there was only one of these. In order to make another one, you had to take a picture of it. I have somehow weaseled my way into the Library of Congress and managed to check out the only one, okay? Now, what I knew, about this was we all know that the Capitol Dome is being reconstructed during the Civil War. What I didn't know until I gained access to it is that they built a new dome on top of the old dome. And to get to the top of the new Capitol, you actually kind of walk on top of the old, and that looks like stone. It's actually copper. You actually go up on top of it. You need a member of Congress to take you up there. If you ever get the chance, it's a heck of a view. Now, I wanted to get up there for a particular reason, because I've been for 20-some years working on a Then and Now book. I wanted to reproduce this May 1865 photo of the Grand Review. It was from the Capitol Dome. That's what the caption said. It clearly looks like it is. And as soon as I got up there, I realized I was way too high up. Like way too high up. So I did all of it not for nothing, but then I saw a door lower down on the dome and came across this sign, and all the begging and pleading that I could do was not going to help. So if you ever have the chance, not only find where Civil War photos were taken, use your William Frazanito books, but then take a photo with it in the same place. You'll be happy, and you know what? Standing there while you're waiting for the photo to be taken is a pretty cool moment knowing it. And, when it comes to the human carnage, if you can use one of these books and end up on a battlefield at these places, I've seen people exhibit every range of emotions. As a battlefield guide, I'm in my 28th year doing Gettysburg. I see people be happy, sad, want to lay down in the same spot, lash out at me, A couple have passed out over the years. You know, there's no code of conduct really on a battlefield here, but when you go back to these same places, you see the same rocks in the same position right there. There's something about that. And if nothing else, I hope you're using your Civil War photography for that. And when you do find the right spot, you know, I've been showing you so far some then and now techniques, you know, in this case, the McLean House at Appomattox. You can also take an old photo and sort of shove it up in there into the modern, making sort of a window in time. Now, I wish we had Civil War photos at Bennett Place, you know, for me to share with you, but we only have post-war shots, and I took this one myself, you know, much later, but we just don't have a lot for the West or the South or the Confederacy, so we have to do the best we can with what we have. Now, here's a series of photos taken on a fateful day, April 14th, 1865. This is the day the flag is being re-raised over Fort Sumter. You can see the new U.S. flag up there. You see a huge crowd. We know the main speaker is a guy named Henry Ward Beecher. You zoom in, you can not only see him, but you can also see the hero of Sumter himself, Robert Anderson, there holding a cane right over there. So, I mean, you know, that kind of is pretty interesting for that date. That same date, April 14th, the Richmond is in Union hands, of course. Here's a photo of a largely deserted Main Street around that same time. Around that same time, down that street to the left, you'd see Confederates with their arms and legs dangling outside the windows of Libby Prison, the very prison they had used to imprison Union officers. That's happening on that day. And on that day, April 14th, there are Union and Confederate soldiers, when this photo was taken, seemingly fraternizing outside the Richmond Capitol. That's George Washington's monument there, still there at Capitol Square. And they might not have been the best of buddies, but they were getting along. But again, this is April 14th, the same day Abraham Lincoln went to the theater. He was there to see our American cousin. Here's a hand-colored picture of the playbill with Laura Keene herself, the star of the actual show, and you know the rest of the story here. Lincoln's in that booth that you see in this hand-colored photo, sitting in a chair right there when John Wilkes Booth comes into a door over there, shoots the president, leaps, stabs the guest, leaps onto the stage, yells some words, and runs out the back door. And you know that Lincoln is taken across the street where he will die the following morning at the Peterson House. And incredibly, there's a guy named Oakey, Henry Oakey, I believe I have his name right, is actually staying there. He's an amateur photographer, and he's actually staying in the house, and he takes a picture of this room, the blood-stained pillow, the distinctive striped wallpaper. Well, you know, nobody really knew about this yet, so what they're going to, of course, do is start to make renderings, and it's just pretty crowded in there. You know, you got to have Mary Lincoln, but that's not quite enough, so we got to have Sam and Pete Chase there. I don't know why they need Augur there, but Montgomery Meigs and Henry Halleck have to be there too. Wait, that's not enough. I mean, we left out the Secretary of the Navy and, you know, a couple other key people. Let's make the room a little bigger. Hold on, come on. I mean, we don't even have... We don't even have Edwin M. Stanton. I mean, we got to get him in there. So, okay, we're done. No, wait, we don't have Robert Lincoln. We forgot him. You know, we got to get him a little bit bigger, and it got way out of hand after that. I mean, it just kept getting bigger and bigger until people just, you know. This isn't my work, by the way. That's Harold Holzer. Came up with this thing called the rubber room, the way that it kept expanding at that point. Of course, there's a few acts in the drama left of the Civil War. And I think you know what this one is. This is the actual, some of the photos of the actual hanging of the Lincoln conspirators. You can see them actually up there. Let's give a blow up. We can see supposedly Mary Serrata actually passed out. Lewis Payne or Powell, indifferent to what's happening there. Davy Harold and George Atzerodt just clearly visible in this incredible photo because we can zoom in. Because we can zoom in, we can also see that while they're up there, their graves are already dug. That they could see. That's pretty heavy, and we can see the shovels that are there not only to dig the graves, but to put the dirt back over them when they're going to be done. And there's a lot more photos of this that I'm not sharing. I just want to say that, unfortunately, this area's been compromised, but this building is still there. It's been changed a tiny bit, but there it is. It's a tennis court now. The guys were buried right over here. John Wilkes Booth would actually later be buried at this site as well, and then all of them would be moved later. But up in here, they open it 4 times a year. It's at Fort McNair. They open it to the public. You can go in. They actually have the furniture from the movie The Conspirator there, so you can. They have the courtroom scene sort of where it actually took place, right above the gallows. Of course, one other act in the drama, in May of 1865, Jefferson Davis is captured in Georgia. and then imprisoned here. We don't have a photo of this, but that's enough of the casemate at Fortress Monroe to allow you to put your loser friend in the same spot and sit there. And sorry, he's a good friend of mine. Don't take that the wrong way. And then, of course, the Grand Review, of which I already showed you one picture, has to occur. And this is May of 1865. It took 2 days for the principal Union armies to go by. And I like focusing in on these photos when they went by the executive mansion. There was a big reviewing stand. And you can sort of imagine when you zoom in on the people there and seeing the blurs of the people, you could imagine the people watching saying, oh my God, that's the Iron Brigade. That doesn't work, but that's the 21st, New York or something like that. And they're finally kind of looking around and starting to associate the actual army with what they've been reading about forever. You zoom in and you can actually see Winfield Scott Hancock in command of the Veteran Reserve Corps at that point. But when you zoom more to the right, not only do you see some of those Veteran Reserve Corps and the blur of motion of the troops marching by, but in one photo, Ulysses S. Grant looking right back at the camera. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton next to him. Now President Andrew Johnson. Wesley Merritt, the general. George Gordon Meade commanding the Army of the Potomac. Gideon Welles, the Navy Secretary. William Tecumseh Sherman commanding the armies of the West. And Montgomery Meigs, the Quartermaster General. Here you have the President, Secretary of War, Secretary of the Navy, and the commanders of the chief armies that have just, emerged victorious in the Civil War in one photo, not to mention Eli Parker, the Seneca Indian on Grant's staff. So this allowed all sorts of moments. With Richmond fallen, the photographers flocked there and recorded maybe the most single meaningful photo of the Civil War. Could there be a more meaningful photo than recently freed slaves in front of the ruins of the Confederate Capitol, all in one photo without even a caption? And now the photographers flocked out toward the battlefields that they couldn't access. This one, Gaines's Mill in Cold Harbor, to see the horror of war. And that's really what we're left with, right? The dead. Cemeteries are established here at City Point and in 1,000 other places. And eventually they're going to start to remember these cemeteries. People are going to come and visit these cemeteries. Civil War veterans will increasingly be elected to every state legislature in the country, but also in Congress. They'll form groups. They're going to march in parades. They're going to found newspapers and proliferate what they had done during the Civil War. And then they're going to go to battlefields, and they're going to erect monuments on those battlefields. And this one still stands, of course, on Henry Hill. And in a somewhat candid pose, you can actually see some people during the dedication. Incredibly, in the 1940s, it was discovered that these 200-pounder parrot shells were actually live for 80 years, just sitting there. And these are the kinds that disintegrate you. They don't need to hit you. I mean, being near them is enough to disintegrate a human. And there they are. And the photographer actually went and backed his way to the monument and recorded a completely candid photo in the Civil War. You don't have many of those because it was so involved to set it up. But two generals included, Heintzelman and Montgomery Meigs, and very few of anybody in here is aware that a photo is actually being taken. And I think this really humanizes people as well. They're just hanging out, waiting for the festivities to begin or end. And of course, eventually these veterans are going to get a lot older. In this photo, these are some of the 1,800 Union and Confederate veterans that came to Gettysburg for the 75th anniversary, of the Battle of Gettysburg. And on that day, the day this photo was taken, there were planes flying overhead. There were tanks going around. There were color movies being shot. Okay, that Civil War soldiers, some of them saw 2 world wars, television, color movies, just absolutely blows me away, and it fills me with the idea that it just wasn't that long ago. I've been to 1/5 of all of the Battle of Gettysburg anniversaries that have ever happened. I've shook the hand of at least 110 people who shook the hand of Civil War veterans. I'll bet you there's somebody in this room who shook the hand of a Civil War veteran. I only missed the last one by 11 years. It wasn't that long ago. And I think that all y'all and all the speakers you have here, and me in particular in my job at the American Battlefield Trust, we got to drag the past forward so it just doesn't seem all that long ago. And that gets harder as time goes on. That's not all that easy with, World War II, Korea and Vietnam dominating the headlines and people not wanting to talk about war as Civil War battlefields got paved over in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. But a few things happened in the late 80s, as most of you know. The movie Glory, the 125th anniversary, the birth of the renewed reenactment community, the Ken Burns series, the Gettysburg movie, and you pick it, and the birth of the modern battlefield preservation movement really, really restarted things. And I think that those people at Gettysburg, the 1,800 of them, by the way, 7 of whom died when they came to this event, and they were happy, the organizers were happy that only 7 of these, guys died because their average age was 94, and in 1938, that was old. So they considered it a success that only 7 of them died, but that their legacy has continued a little. So I want to close with just ensuring you that there's a lot of still tangible reminders out there. I was recently in Nashville trying to set up for a tour, and there's so many photos taken from the Nashville Capitol. I was having trouble determining which was taken where, and that's when I came across my favorite marble squiggle right there. Okay, I see this little weird little S-shaped thing there, and then I simply went out to the Capitol and walked around until I found this. Aha! Now I know which way it's facing. Ooh, now I can pose with a photo with the squiggle because I'm obsessed with it. Now I can get Vanna White over there to do another one as well. Okay? So in our buildings we have reminders. In the artillery pieces, the witness pieces, the ones that fought the Civil War, here's one at Port Hudson photographed with its trunnion blown off, with part of its muzzle blown off, and that thing is on display at Port Hudson, cool battlefield in Louisiana after Vicksburg. Now this one's not set up right, so I actually went back and took a photo in the same orientation so you can see the comparison of the trunnion and the blown out muzzle sort of. And when you start doing things like this and trying to read the serial numbers, I realized that this gun was the same gun that was taken from another direction, and when you zoom in, you can read the serial number on it, and then see that the serial number of that gun photographed at Atlanta is in the museum at Kennesaw Mountain, Georgia. And you can actually compare the 2 muzzles and see that it's totally the same piece. And something about being able to interact with these things of the past is neat. And I hold out great hope because one of the greatest things we have right now, especially for the young people, is this ability, these digital goodies we have now that we could have never imagined. This is a screen cap of me actually walking into the Gettysburg Address scene explaining it. This is my colleague, Chris White, walking down the sunken road and talking about it on video as it, sort of comes out. It's this sort of next step of then and now. And I think we're going to have to work harder to keep people interested, especially as the Civil War is in some circles suffering, in the last few years. It's interesting that as a battlefield guide at Gettysburg, I used to have to spend significant time on a tour until about 7 years ago telling people that Robert E. Lee wasn't perfect. Okay? And in recent years, I have to convince people that Robert E. Lee was the greatest Confederate general, that he wasn't an idiot or something like that. I mean, he's taken a beating in the news, and this is how it is, by the way. Grant took a beating for a solid 80 years until he started to get refurbished a little bit more. James Longstreet is like that. These things ebb and flow, so I don't think it's the death of our society, but we do have to be aware of it. Now, on the way up here, I had been long obsessed with this photo, okay? This adorns the cover of the Ken Burns series. You're probably familiar with it. These are Vermonters outside of Washington in a camp. And I didn't make this discovery, but somebody realized that these rocks should still be there and went out and found them, actually, in a Northern Virginia neighborhood. So I went up there on the way down here and actually noticed it's kind of covered by stuff now, but you can clearly see the same type of bump in the right spot, and you can see the same type of configuration. The photographer at the time, a guy named Houghton, actually took a picture of musicians on that rock pile. So I went over to the rock pile, again, covered by stuff, but you can see the shape is the same, and went and did it. And if this doesn't make you interested, I have a surefire way to make you interested, and that is that this photo not only is cool, not only does it show all these Vermonters in what will become the bloodiest brigade of the Union Army in the Civil War, the Vermont Brigade, but I'm sure we have some Seinfeld fans here, and this photo was in every episode of Seinfeld. So, I want to assure you that if there was such a thing as TV back then, the people that lived through the Civil War, soldier or civilian, white, black, male or female, would have laughed similarly if the situation was the same. And because the thing I've learned most about the Civil War and studying at all this is not how different we are, but how similar we are. In fact, it seems like in essentials, they are just like us. And that's one of the reasons I am proud to work for the American Battlefield Trust. This isn't going to be a heavy sale. We preserve battlefields from the Revolution, 1812, and of course the Civil War, where we've preserved now 57,000 plus acres of battlefield land in a whole bunch of states. We've saved a lot in North Carolina as well. So go to battlefields.org if you're interested. Thanks so much for your attention and for coming out tonight. Thank you. See how I did. Thank you. Wow. Wow. Thank you. Hold on. Hold on. Thank you. Wow, that's a rowdy crowd there. I'm ready to go. Am I supposed to take some questions? I don't know if they can hear you. He was saying, thank you, Gary. Let's see if this one works.
I've got a spare. Get this one on. Hello? Now it's good.
There you go. Get closer.
Thank you, Gary, for the very educational and very entertaining talk that we had tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Ooh, let's do it again.
We'll have our Q&A session. I will start it off with a question.
Sure.
We've seen some of your reenactments, your personal reenactments of these photographs. My question is, what was your favorite photo to reenact?
Ooh, wow, that's great. I think somehow sitting on a rock at Devil's Den where the sketch artist Alfred Wad sits and he's sketching and looking up the Valley of Death, sitting in that same spot because his eyeballs, you can see exactly where they're looking. I wish I had that photo with me. That one's meaningful to me because I can dress like him and look at what he saw and think about what that day was like, bringing me back in time, sort of. So that would definitely be my favorite. Thank you.
Other questions?
Okay.
Thank you, Gary. I don't think I'm putting you on the spot with this one, though. I saw a presentation on TV a few months back. A fellow in Gettysburg, which you're very familiar of. He's North Carolina State University professor who investigated the 5 photos of where Lincoln's Gettysburg Address happened.
Yes.
Is there any update on that? He actually spent 10 years with his students and discovered supposedly the exact spot. And is there a memorial there now or something like that?
Yeah. So what he's talking about is that this former Disney animator and now professor named Christopher Oakley has been working for a while to triangulate the 5 photos we know that show the platform at Gettysburg and do other research to try to digitally reconstruct it. And he made 2 main conclusions. Neither of the conclusions were that he suggested a new spot. It was always in the same spot. We've known that for decades, okay? But what he came up with was, 1, he thinks the platform is trapezoidal, which is very interesting to me. I'm not sure if it teaches us or impacts our understanding of the Civil War, but it might not be rectangular. And then 2, he says it was at the same place we always thought it, but that it was shifted, and that shifting places a small portion of it in the National Cemetery and not in the local town cemetery, okay? In my opinion, and I'm friends with him, by the way, and I'm the naysayer in the New York Times saying, so what? And I'll say it to y'all. It's sort of a so what. He didn't change the location. He made some assumptions in order to make his model, like how tall certain houses were and therefore how high up the camera was and how far over, which window was it taken from to make his digital reconstruction. So no, nothing has changed. And I don't know that it's made any waves other than that he's great at publicity. The dude gets in the New York Times every time he makes a discovery, and I'm jealous of him. But no, nothing's changed, sir. The patience is killing me here, the suspense.
Are there still Civil War photographs to be discovered in collections, in odd and obscure collections around the country that maybe the public would benefit from seeing?
Yeah, so 30 years ago, 20 years ago, I'd have said, no way, we're running out. So first of all, I have to define discovery. So is discovery finding a photo that's never been seen before? Is it finding a different version of that photo? Is it taking a photo we've all known before and then figuring out where it was taken or who is in it? So there are different types of discoveries, and I can assure you that at the Center for Civil War Photography, we put out our journal 4 times a year, and on the cover of each one is an unpublished photograph that's never been published on the printed page before. We've been doing this for 15 years. So the answer is there's more. I don't know where they are, or else we'd be exploiting them. Most recently, I think one of the most poignant hospital photos of the Civil War was just discovered in somebody's private collection showing Camp Letterman and the youngest amputees I've ever seen right after this horrific battle. So yes, there's lots to be done, and something I failed to say during my talking, there's not a lot of room to get in there, is that I talk about this stuff like I'm out there making discoveries and doing this. This is available to all of us. Just go to the Library of Congress, put into the search engine your favorite subject, and you download something, even if it's not your favorite subject. I think you're going to find something that interests you within the depths of that photograph. So I think that, it'll be crowdsourced, and, some will be made by historians and some by buffs, and I think it's great. So more to come for sure. Yeah, Beauregard. Yes, yeah, I agree. All I need is the old photo of Beauregard shooting. And then I would definitely use it too. Oh, we got a couple, some in the middle there. Hold on, he's got the mic. He's going to sprint on over to you any second.
Now, when you make a discovery, who has to authenticate what you determine?
That's a great question. Who authenticates the discoveries? Now, zooming out, I still don't even know what a historian is. Is it when you write a book or go to school or write an article or somebody sees you as a historian? I think that's it, right? So I think that's the answer. Now, there are portrait people and then and now people, and then there are 3D people. So there are different people who need to authenticate in order to do it. Now, the social media has provided a platform for anybody who makes a discovery. And by the way, let me tell you, most of them are not only wrong, but just terrible. Like, as if you're going to go to some farm field in Tennessee and suddenly, yup, that's it. And then they go on social media and they call the, newspapers and everything like that without any evidence whatsoever. For then and now stuff, it seems like it's William Frazanito who kind of pioneered the then and now stuff. He doesn't really do that anymore, so then he sends those letters to me, and then I get to piss people off, and they suddenly don't respect me very much anymore. And I mean, there's one, and I saw one of your magazines there talking about the Union dead at Gettysburg, the Harvest of Death. This is a series of photos I don't even like talking about anymore, because now I'm at 50 people I have personally rejected and told them why. And, and they say nice things to me before that, and I tell them how it's going to go. I'm probably going to disagree with you, and oh, no, it's going to be great. And, oh, my God, they just come up with terrible theories because they haven't put the time in. So anybody can make them, but I would say to have somebody who knows the subject well, not just your friends or your mom, authenticate it. I don't have an answer for you. It's very frustrating.
Towards the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned that there were far more photographers from the North than the South.
Yes.
Was that because of the population difference, expense involved, or training, or what?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So it's all of those things. All the big population centers, you take the big cities like Philly and New York, where you could have all these studios supporting these operations, whereas in the South, you really have New Orleans and Charleston as some of the big ones. So not only did you have that, but you also have a very real thing in that Matthew Brady used to be seen as the guy that took all the photos, and then in the 90s or so, people said, wait, he was blind, he didn't take any photos, and what it is something in between. He was the boss of the studio, he took some photos, he wasn't blind, and now people try to take credit away from him. But the main photographers of the Civil War, Barnard, Russell, O'Sullivan, Gardner, all the ones you've heard of, they all worked for or were trained by Matthew Brady. And therefore, you're going to have many more of these people in the North who were trained to do it way before people in the South. The North, the South had a whole lot of money, but the general populace didn't. In the North, you had all these laborers that had a lot of spare money that could buy cartes de visite and buy the stereo views that allowed them to, travel the world and whatnot. So I think it's population, but I also think it's a matter of training and equipment. Good one. Never been asked that before.
Do we have one more question?
And I can take them offline after. Looks like there's one over there, sir.
Right.
Your left. There you go.
There we go.
This room really emptied out. They weren't kidding. I have that effect.
Could photographers go to both sides, such as being considered neutral, part of the press, or what?
No, if you heard that, so were the photographers sort of neutral part of the press? No. Now, would they execute a photographer like Alexander Gardner was captured by Jeb Stuart after the Battle of Gettysburg? And he was let go after being questioned and whatnot. No. Northern photographers were seen, the last thing you'd want is anybody being seen as the press or someone who's going to show the condition of your army in behind your lines. So Northern photographers recorded Northern subjects. The only time they really covered Southern subjects were when the Southerners fell back, like Petersburg, Richmond, Charleston, or across the Rappahannock River, showing Confederates kind of waving at them on the other side of the river. I mean, they are completely separate things. So, it wasn't even, this was new, remember. This idea of photographing, this hadn't happened in a war yet, so they're working this out as they go, but very separate. I'm around too. I'll be up here if anybody wants anything else or signature or answer any questions. Thank you.